Hello, everybody. Garry, Adelman, American Battlefield Trust. I am, suffice it to say, super excited to be here for this Gettysburg 157th commemoration here on the battlefield. And one of the things I love about Gettysburg and all battlefields, Shiloh, Vicksburg, a lot of the large military parks, even on a busy day, you can go off into the woods along an unbeaten path and go and have peace right where something happens. We are in McPherson's or Herbst or Reynolds Woods here, down by the banks of Willoughby's Run that you might be able to see in the background there. We call it Willoughby's Run, namely because Willoughby is not a last name of somebody. It's Willoughby Winchester's first name, and therefore it's sort of a possessive thing. The run seems to come out near his house. There, Tim Smith, I've done you your favor. So here we are along the banks of Willoughby's Run, and there's all sorts of things going on around me, and we'll see them soon. There's a quarry right behind the camera. There's a big ridge that leads up toward McPherson's Ridge up there, and you've got all sorts of actions going on here. Generally speaking, the Chambersburg Pike is about 150 yards behind the cameraman, Chris White. Let's see his nod right there. And the Confederates are coming from the west on the morning of July 1st, 1863. 1st Cavalry, then Archer's Brigade and Davis's Brigade, then Pettigrew and Brockenbrough, followed by other troops under Pender that you've heard about before. This is a multi-phased action that starts with the cavalry in the morning, continues into mid-morning, there's a lull, and then it picks up again in the afternoon, and we'll try to sort some of this out as we go along. As for the Union side, first you have Buford's cavalry holding off the Confederates, and then you have Reynolds' First Corps. That's the Iron Brigade. That's eventually Cutler on the other side of the road. And then Stone's Brigade and Biddle's Brigade entering this action as well. But for now, we're going to start by talking about the cavalry up in this action because it's a very famous part of what happens at Gettysburg and in the Gettysburg movie. So I'm going to bring on cavalry expert and Trust Senior Education Associate Dan Davis.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our 157th anniversary commemoration of the Battle of Gettysburg. Please join us out there on Facebook, on YouTube. Check out our videos for the next 3 days. We will be out and about the Gettysburg battlefield. Now, as Garry mentioned, early on the morning of July the 1st, 1863, John Buford's Cavalry Division is going to begin what is known as a covering force action. They're trading space for time, delaying A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps coming in from the west from Chambersburg toward Gettysburg, and Buford is fighting a delaying action. He's trying to buy time for John Reynolds' wing of the Army of the Potomac to come up and deploy and beat back the Confederate attack. Now, a lot of attention, and rightly so, is given to the ground south of Gettysburg, the ground that Buford surveys, the Cemetery Ridge, Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, the Round Tops, and their importance in the battle. But Buford also recognizes the importance of the terrain north and west of Gettysburg, the successive ridges, McPherson's Ridge, Hare's Ridge, Knoxland or Whistler's Ridge, and he realizes that this terrain is perfect for fighting a delaying action. He can position his troopers on each of those ridges, and he also, just over my left shoulder, you'll notice, he can also utilize Willoughby's Run, Marsh Creek, farther out to the west. Now, put yourself in the shoes of these Confederate soldiers as they're coming down the Chambersburg Pike that morning. They're having to deal with not only Union cavalry in their immediate front, but they're also having to deal with John Califf's Battery A, 2nd U.S. Artillery, various sections positioned all off to my right on McPherson's Ridge, firing at them. They're coming down the road. It's early in the morning. Every time they start taking fire, they have to get off the road from their column, get into a battle line, shake out a skirmish line, and push forward. Just as they get to close enough to that Union cavalry, the Union cavalry is going to withdraw. They're going to go back to the road, get into a line of column, and continue down the Chambersburg Pike. But at the same time, they have to deal with crossing Marsh Creek. They have to deal with crossing Willoughby Run. And this gets to be a very, very tedious process through the course of the morning. It's so tedious, in fact, it's going to buy Buford enough time to delay their advance until Reynolds can arrive in Gettysburg. Now I'm going to pass it over to the curator of the Adams County Historical Society, Andrew Dalton, who's going to bring us up after Reynolds arrives in the field.
But first, I want to welcome so many people coming. Here we have people from Illinois, New Jersey, double New Jersey, Massachusetts, Arkansas, Virginia, someone with an ancestor that fought here. Then we've got more Ohio and none less than Wayne Motts from the National Civil War Museum watching us. So sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
No problem. Thanks, Garry. So yeah, we're actually at the corner of 3 historic farms on the Gettysburg battlefield. And for those of you who can't be here with us today, I wanted to kind of showcase the different properties that we're looking at. Behind me is the farm of Congressman Edward McPherson. He's not actually the resident of this property. The Slentz family lived there at the time of the battle. McPherson was in Washington. He was in the United States Congress. Eventually, he's the clerk of the House of Representatives. But then to my left is the farm of John Herbst. He's about a 40-year-old Battlefield farmer. His wife and his 5 children live a few hundred yards to my left. Then behind me, across Willoughby's Run, is the farm of Emanuel Harmon, a Washington, D.C. inventor. And it's actually his family members, Amelia Harmon, a 16-year-old girl, and her Aunt Rachel, who live in a large brick house across Willoughby's Run that would later be burned by the Confederate Army during the second of 2 major attacks that crossed this very property that we're standing on here. So to get back into that fighting, on the morning of July 1st, you have 2 Confederate brigades coming up the Chambersburg Pike toward Gettysburg. Archer's brigade in the lead deploys in the fields behind the camera on the Emanuel Harmon farm. Archer's regiments, they're not that big, from Tennessee and Alabama. They move forward across the fields behind the camera, cross Willoughby's Run. They ascend up the steep incline through Herbst Woods and crash into the Union Iron Brigade. Of course, General Reynolds is killed in that initial engagement. Archer's regiments are tired. They've marched a great distance that morning. Archer himself is a kind of a very sickly guy. He's at the Battle of Antietam, for instance, he's carried to the field in a hospital wagon. So Archer is not in the best health. Ends up in this massive retreat of his brigade toward Willoughby's Run. They cross back over, and Archer is trapped in this kind of thicket. It's a grove of large trees with all kinds of underbrush. And we'll actually walk over and show you what that looks like today. You can see the terrain is very similar on the other side of Willoughby's Run, right where we're standing, to how it would have looked at the time of the battle 157 years ago. Archer is captured in this massive retreat. He's captured with about 50 to 100 of his men. Others of Archer's brigade are captured further down the line. The Iron Brigade swings across Willoughby's Run, basically enveloping Archer's lines. And Archer himself tries to get away, but a big Wisconsin private named Patrick Maloney grabs him. Archer, at first he tries to resist arrest, but then he's subdued and ends up surrendering his sword and his firearm to a lieutenant who arrived on the scene. And then there's a famous exchange between Archer and Abner Doubleday, supposedly as he's crossing. They had been classmates, and Archer says, or Doubleday says, "It's good to see you, Archer." And Archer said, "It's not good to see you by a damned sight." So Archer, I should point out, is the first Confederate general lost to Robert E. Lee after Lee takes command of the Army of Northern Virginia. So all of this is happening right here behind me in these fields. Did you want to add something, Garry?
Yes, I do. I'm going to give you a break, and then I'm going to come right back to you here. Again, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. You're on our Facebook page here. We're going to be posting videos here and on YouTube throughout this Gettysburg 157th commemoration. Sorry you can't be here, even if you are. Share this with your friends if you can. We've got some very good viewership right now, and we really appreciate you watching, you helping to perpetuate American history. And we've got people from all over the place. I saw our friend Tom Moore. Timothy York has joined. He wants to know how the weather is. It is beautiful in the woods. It's going to be hot later. Yes, there are going to be ticks, but that's no reason to keep you away. Get some bug spray and come out to Gettysburg or to your favorite historic site when you can. We've got a Kentucky history teacher. Thanks for what you do. Bath, New York. Another town I can't pronounce. More Ohio, Louisville, Kentucky. I'm sorry, Louisville, and Massachusetts as well. So here we are down near the banks of Willoughby's Run. The town of Gettysburg is about a mile off to my right. The Confederates are coming from the left. Andrew just covered some of this initial action, ending with the really harsh criticism of, "I'm not glad to see you by a damn sight." That is a Civil War clapback, if ever I've heard one. Now, there's going to be a big lull after these initial actions. Remember, we've already dealt with Buford's cavalry actions, holding off the Confederates. We've already dealt with sort of the Iron Brigade coming and conquering the initial push by the Confederates. But the Southerners are going to come back after a lull with much more powerful forces. But before we get into that, Andrew, this is as close as we're going to get. This is Willoughby's Run. Now, on the other side of the Willoughby's Run, you know you have the Harmon Farm, and we have all sorts of stuff going on. What's the Springs Hotel? What's going on along this run?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like Garry mentioned, there's a big lull in the fighting in the early afternoon of July 1st, 1863. And during this lull, the skirmishers of both sides deploy onto the fields of the Harmon Farm. And the skirmishing becomes so hot that 2 companies of the 80th New York Infantry are sent across Willoughby's Run, and they actually seize the Harmon house. Now, Amelia Harmon, the 16-year-old girl, and her aunt are actually watching the battle from the windows of the house at this time, and they hear from below this loud knocking, banging on the doors. And they go downstairs, open the doors, and a stream of, she described, powder-blackened bluecoats rush into the house, dispersing out to all the west windows facing towards what's known as Hers Ridge. These Union soldiers begin to sharpshoot at the Confederate positions at the base of Hers Ridge in what we call the Springs Hotel Woods. So this engagement's happening, and eventually the Confederate attacks that would take place in the afternoon, when they get to the point of the rise where the Harmon House sits, a company of the 52nd North Carolina drives the Union New Yorkers out of the house, and they actually set fire to the house and barn, driving the two women out into the fields of the battle. So it's this harrowing experience that she writes about much later. She's, again, only 16 years old at the time. These two citizens basically just shot out into the midst of this horrendous battle. And when they come out of the house, they're between the two lines of battle, between Heath's division and Pender's division, which is following them up. And they don't know what to do. They don't know whether to go right towards the town or left towards what they perceive to be safety. And they end up going through the Confederate lines. They survive and then return on July 5th to see their house a blackened ruin, as she described it. So there's this incredible history of what's taking place along the creek. I did want to talk for a minute about those Confederate attacks that we mentioned on the afternoon of July 1st. You have Pettigrew's brigade behind me, big North Carolina regiments. The 26th North Carolina, the biggest unit in Lee's army, almost 800 men. You have the 11th North Carolina, the 52nd and 47th North Carolina. They cross Willoughby's Run, and in one of the probably most severe engagements of the entire Civil War, end up driving the Iron Brigade, the famed battle-hardened units of Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, back out of Herbst Woods, and eventually to their fallback position on Seminary Ridge. Pettigrew's brigade is really responsible for this collapse of the Iron Brigade, but then there's also a small Virginia brigade to the left of Pettigrew, commanded by John Brockenbrough. Brockenbrough has these very small Virginia units that have a pretty bad reputation in the Army of Northern Virginia for cowardice. A lot of them are former artillerymen, so they're really not used to infantry combat. Brockenbrough's men actually get to this area where we're standing.
I want to make it more exciting.
Go ahead.
So set it up, but don't get there.
So
yet.
Brockenbrough's men, they push towards Willoughby's Run, and they start to engage the Iron Brigade and some elements of the Bucktail Brigade, the Pennsylvanians, who are to the right of the Iron Brigade. And once they cross Willoughby's Run, they reach this kind of strange terrain that ends up holding them up. And whether they're held up due to being tired or whether they're not really too fond of continuing the fight, we don't know. But it turns out that a lot of them seek refuge in this giant quarry at the base of McPherson's Ridge along Willoughby's Run. And it turns out that North Carolinians from Alfred Scales' brigade end up crossing over Brockenbrough's lines, seeing basically that the brigade is paralyzed, and a lot of them are just basically hiding in this giant pit.
Okay, leave some for the end. Okay, we're gonna show you this pit. This is one of the reasons we want to hold this off for a second, is because hardly anyone comes down here. A lot of people go to McPherson's Woods and Reynolds Woods and whatnot, Herbst Woods, but very few people come down to Willoughby's Run, and most people don't look over toward this quarry behind you right here. I want to do two things real quick. First of all, you already know this is Andrew Dalton. He's the president, CEO of the executive director of the Adams County Historical Society. You know this because of the fancy graphics that Chris White, thank you very much, behind the camera, has put up there. So that's just great. Secondly, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We hope you share this with your friends. We hope you have a meaningful Gettysburg, and a positive one to the degree possible, and a reflective one, Gettysburg 157. And thirdly, before we show the actual quarry and do a little reveal over there, Chris, if I can ask you to come forward here, let's get a good moment of Zen with no talking for 10 seconds and just check out Willoughby's Run. Maybe he can focus in on it here.
And it's hard to imagine today, looking at this very tranquil scene, you would have, at the time of the battle, seen this desperate encounter between regiments like the 24th Michigan and the 26th North Carolina, where it took several attempts for the North Carolinians to cross Willoughby's Run and take the position that had been held by the Iron Brigade. Behind me is the quarry that Garry mentioned. It's known as the McPherson Quarry, or maybe there's a few other names for it as well, but this is the actual scene that we just discussed, where Brockenbrough's men sought refuge and kind of failed to follow up the attack, the final Confederate attack on McPherson's Ridge.
And I'm going to walk into it a little bit so you'll get an idea of the size, but keep going, Andrew, because this is cool. You don't have to come in, but let me...
So there's a lot of quarries around the Gettysburg battlefield, and they predate the battle. Quarries are very common at the time. There's several on the McPherson farm. There's others in Herbst Woods. This is just one of them, but it's a very large one. And undoubtedly, many of the houses in Gettysburg The stone for the foundation and for the stone houses that you see today would have come out of quarries like this. And there are other accounts. Gary's kind of showing you the depth. You can see how steep this is, and really it's virtually unchanged from the battle, although there may have been a little bit more water in the base of it. After the Civil War, in the 1870s, I believe, there's actually a couple children. One of them drowns in this quarry, despite a really incredible rescue effort by the African-American waiters at the Springs Hotel, which was across Willoughby's Run. And I do want to mention, so along Willoughby's Run is the famous Catalysine Spring. There's many ways to say it, but in fact, in 1865, the spring became nationally famous. Some would say internationally famous. Water was shipped all around the country, and in 1869, investors, as well as some Gettysburg natives, got together and formed a committee to build a hotel next to the famous spring. And the Gettysburg Springs Hotel, as it was known, stood until 1917 and was the scene of many veterans reunions, prominent reunions of veterans of the Battle of Gettysburg, including people like James Longstreet, Daniel Sickles, Wade Hampton. There were all these incredible people here. George Meade actually visited in 1869 and sampled the water from the spring. It was thought to have healing properties, curing everything from thyroid problems to
constant imaginings of evil and
Yes.
depression of spirits.
Right, I like that one, and also ugliness is my favorite. So I'm not sure if we have any real hard scientific data on curing ugliness from this water. But anyway, the spring water was bottled into the 1930s and sold locally. And now there's very little left. There's a cap on the spring if you ever visit this property. But to know that this early tourist attraction and commercial success is virtually unknown today is just really fascinating. And I encourage everybody to visit the banks of Willoughby's Run to learn more about this incredible history here that spans so many different decades.
I think that's great, Andrew. And, I made the mistake early on to kind of go it alone and just study the battle. And then you realize that there's a lot more to these battlefields than just what happens for a day or two or three or four. These are people's houses, they're their backyards, they're their farms. And before and after, these events affected them intensely. And we'll be talking about this as the days go on here. For 3 days, we're going to be on, and we'll be posting videos even beyond that into and over the weekend for Gettysburg 157. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're with Dan Davis, Andrew Dalton, Chris White behind the camera. And I just want to make sure everybody understands this because, we as, battlefield people sort of really understand this. But again, I want to make sure people understand. You've got Archer and Davis sort of coming in. Archer and Davis, those are brigades, and they are part of Henry Heath's division. Guys, if I make mistakes, make sure you correct me. They're the advanced 2 brigades, but there are 4 brigades in that division, a large division, more than 7,000 soldiers. And then they are followed up by 2 more brigades under Pettigrew and Brockenbrough. We've been talking about them. They don't all go in at the same time. These are sort of separate fights. But all those guys, in a way, engage the Iron Brigade, and it's sometimes Buford soldiers, and in sometimes Stone's Brigade. Aha! A completely different division. The Iron Brigade is in Wadsworth's division. Stone and some of the other troops, Biddle's Brigade, they are in Rowley's or Doubleday's division. So things get really confusing, but if you want to understand a battle, start memorizing or at least coming to understand which divisions belong in which corps. It really, really helps to have this stuff sorted out. It's not magic. Once you do that, what you read and what you see on video starts to click, and it was the best advice I ever got. So I just wanted to throw that out there really quick. We will be here and on YouTube for the coming days, presenting this stuff to you. We encourage you to engage with us, share this with your friends, engage positively as you go along, and hit us with your questions. I've already seen some great hashtags coming along here. So people are wanting Black Hat Love. What was it? Didn't you stretch first? Somebody's asking me. I don't know why. I guess I'm missing one of the comments over there. Somebody said, I've watched for 5 minutes. I'm already exhausted. I know the feeling. We do get tired, although our enthusiasm usually keeps us through the day. Then we have a beer, we sleep, and we do it again the next day. So we hope you join. Dan, Andrew, anything else to add?
I just wanted to add one thing. So it's so important to remember what the aftermath of a battle looked like, especially in this area. The Harmon House is a blackened ruin. The barn is burned to the ground. The brick house is gutted. But then you have literally hundreds of temporary graves surrounding this area that we're standing in. Confederate and Union graves. The Union graves would be moved to the Soldiers National Cemetery. Confederate graves, in some cases, stayed here until the 1870s when they were gradually moved to cemeteries like Hollywood Cemetery in Virginia, some other cemeteries further south. And then, of course, there's hospitals. The John Herbst farm, several yards to my left, turned into a massive hospital. The barn was burned. The house harbored tons of wounded Union and Confederate soldiers. And actually, John Herbst's wife, Susanna, who undoubtedly was there and witnessed this hospital scene, she died of dysentery in September of 1863, one of dozens of citizens of Gettysburg that actually died as a result of the battle, either through accidents, picking up ordnance off the field, or through being exposed to these deadly hospitals that were virtually in every structure in and around Gettysburg. So it's important to remember that, I think, as we walk across the field, that it's so tranquil today, but at the time it was a scene of complete death and destruction.
Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Dan Davis as we wrap it up here, but I wanted to say we got someone watching from England, and I wish I could claim you were the furthest, but we have someone from Thailand watching. Beat that. And maybe some part of Australia or New Zealand could, I guess, beat that in terms of being the farthest away. So my compliments to you all. We've probably got about 40 or 48 states represented here. You're really all over the place. I want to say hello to my best buddy in the world, Justin Shaw. Don't record this, man, because I'm saying it here live. And to Maggie and Fox. Thanks for watching from San Diego, Ramona, California. Dan?
Just to close out this video very quickly, we look at Gettysburg as a 3-day battle. A very important day to look at, albeit it's sort of overshadowed by days 2 and 3. July 2nd and July 3rd, 1863 is July 1st. July 1st is going to go a long way in influencing Robert E. Lee's decisions as the battle takes shape. On the first day, not getting too far ahead of ourselves, he's going to push 2 Union Corps off the battlefield north and west of town, and this is going to play into Lee's thinking through the course of the next 48 hours. It's very important that you focus not only on Gettysburg in its entirety and also on the civilians, the people that were here before and after the battle, as Andrew mentioned, but take also a look at July 1st and what this does in Robert E. Lee's mindset. Gary?
Yeah, thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up here, but I just want to say so many people are appreciating what we do, that we're bringing you the battlefields. This is something we love to do. It's also the mission of the American Battlefield Trust, to preserve the battlefields of the War of 1812, the Revolutionary War, and of course the Civil War, where we do most of our work, and to educate the public about those conflicts and why it matters today by watching, by sharing, by taking your family or friends to these historic sites. You're helping to perpetuate, as somebody said, our republic as well. So thanks to Andrew, thanks to Dan, thanks to Chris White behind the camera, and all the other people we have kind of moderating these posts as we go. And thank you all for supporting battlefield preservation. Look for our videos. We've already posted on a Medal of Honor recipient at Gettysburg. We've already covered the first shot marker. Meade takes command. We've already shot some other things we haven't posted yet. So keep looking on here and our YouTube channel, and enjoy your day.